You hear the music first, except there is no music, only the slap of bare feet against cobblestone, the ragged breathing of a woman who hasn't stopped moving in 3 days, the low moan that could be pleasure or agony or something human language hasn't invented a word for yet. Her feet are bleeding. The bones in her toes have cracked. She is begging someone, anyone, to make it stop. But her legs keep moving. Her hips keep swaying. Her arms keep reaching toward a rhythm only she can hear. You're standing in the crowd watching Frau Trophäa dance herself to death in the summer heat of 1518, and you don't know whether to pray for her soul or run before whatever madness has taken her reaches out and takes you too. I'm genuinely curious. Drop a comment and tell me where you're tuning in from. It never stops amazing me that a story about medieval streets and inexplicable horror can connect people from every time zone on the planet. The city is Strasbourg, a prosperous trading hub straddling the border between France and the Holy Roman Empire. The year is 1518, and the summer has been merciless. The kind of heat that makes stone buildings feel like ovens, that turns wine sour in the barrel, that shortens tempers and lengthens shadows. Frau Trophäa, history doesn't preserve her first name, only her married title, steps into the narrow street outside her timber-framed house on a July morning and begins to dance. Not the structured steps of a courtly pavane or the joyful stomping of a harvest celebration. This is something else. Compulsive, desperate, uncontrolled. Her neighbors notice first, then her husband, who tries to pull her inside to stop her, to understand what invisible force has possessed his wife's body. But Frau Trophäa cannot stop, or will not. Even she doesn't know which. She dances through the afternoon as the sun climbs higher, through the evening as merchants close their stalls and mothers call children inside, through the night as the city falls silent except for the rhythmic shuffle of her feet and her occasional cries for help. By morning, her shoes are soaked with blood. By the second day, she has an audience. By the third day, she has company. 34 people join her in the first week. Not in sympathy, not in solidarity. They simply start dancing and cannot stop. A butcher abandons his stall mid-transaction, his cleaver still embedded in a side of pork. A mother puts down her infant and begins to twirl, her face a mask of confusion and terror. An elderly man with a cane throws it aside and shuffles in circles until his legs give out, then continues moving on the ground, arms flailing, body convulsing with movement he cannot control. The dancing plague, the Tanzplage, as it will be recorded in city archives, has begun. Within a month, somewhere between 50 and 400 people are dancing in the streets of Strasbourg. The historical records vary wildly on the numbers, but they agree on one thing. People are dying, 15 a day at the epidemic's peak, according to some accounts. Heart attacks, strokes, exhaustion, dehydration. The human body, it turns out, was never designed for perpetual motion. It needs rest, water, stillness. But the dancers get none of these things. They dance until they collapse, sleep where they fall, then wake and immediately resume dancing. Their feet leave bloody tracks on the cobblestones. Their screams echo through the narrow medieval streets. And no one, not the physicians, not the clergy, not the city council, has any idea how to make it stop. The first official response comes from the city's medical community. In 1518, medicine is still governed by the ancient Greek theory of humors, the idea that health depends on balancing blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile in the body. The physicians examine the dancers and reach a consensus. This is a case of hot blood, an overheating of the humoral system that causes the brain to malfunction and the body to move uncontrollably. The cure, they announce, is obvious. The dancers must dance more. They must dance until the hot blood is exhausted, sweated out, burned away by continuous motion. The city council takes this advice seriously. They hire musicians, professional dancers. They construct wooden stages in the public squares and the guild halls, creating official venues where the afflicted can dance under supervision. The logic seems sound. If dancing is the disease, more dancing must be the cure. Work the fever out through the body's own exertion. It's the medieval equivalent of hair of the dog, and it is catastrophically wrong. The music attracts more dancers. Not just the involuntary ones, but curious onlookers who join in for a few minutes and find they cannot leave. The stages concentrate the afflicted in visible locations, making the epidemic seem even worse than it is. And the relentless tempo, drums, pipes, stringed instruments playing hour after hour, seems to intensify the compulsion rather than exhaust it. Some dancers move faster, their movements becoming more violent, more self-destructive. Others begin to hallucinate, screaming about visions of demons or angels or something in between. The wooden stages run slick with sweat and blood. The musicians, paid by the hour, keep playing, and people keep dying. After 2 weeks, the city council realizes their mistake and reverses course. The stages are dismantled. The musicians are dismissed. And in the absence of a medical solution, the city turns to where medieval Europe always turned when medicine failed: God. The new official explanation arrives with the certainty of desperate men grasping at meaning. This is not a medical crisis. This is divine punishment. God has cursed Strasbourg for its sins: the gambling, the prostitution, the blasphemy that flourishes in the taverns and back alleys. The dancing plague is a warning, a supernatural scourge designed to bring the city to its knees in repentance. The solution, therefore, is equally clear: eliminate sin, appease the saints, and the dancing will stop. The crackdown is swift and brutal. Gambling houses are raided and closed. Prostitutes are arrested, publicly humiliated, and expelled from the city. Anyone with a reputation for loose morals finds themselves under suspicion, their businesses shuttered, their neighbors encouraged to report any hint of continued sinfulness. The city council donates a 100-pound candle to the cathedral, an enormous, expensive gesture meant to demonstrate Strasbourg's commitment to righteousness. Masses are held, prayers are offered, and the dancing continues. Now the city tries prohibition. All dancing is banned within city limits, with a fine of 30 shillings for anyone caught moving rhythmically. All music is banned except for string instruments at weddings, and even then, absolutely no drums or tambourines. The municipal archive records the reasoning. Drums are particularly dangerous because they trigger the affliction. Their rhythmic pulse somehow amplifies the compulsion, turning witnesses into victims. It's magical thinking disguised as policy, and it accomplishes nothing except making an already terrified population even more anxious. But Strasbourg in 1518 is not an anomaly. It's part of a pattern. Europe has seen dancing epidemics before. In 1374, a dancing mania struck Aachen and spread throughout the Rhine Valley, affecting dozens of towns. Dancers held hands in circles, leaping and singing for hours until they collapsed. Priests performed exorcisms. Holy water was thrown. Some claimed to see demons dancing alongside the afflicted. The epidemic burned itself out after several months, leaving no clear explanation and no effective treatment. In 1463, another outbreak occurred in Strasbourg itself, the same city, a generation earlier. In 1518, elderly residents would have remembered it, would have whispered to their grandchildren about the last time the dancing madness came. What makes the 1518 outbreak different is that it's the best documented. City archives preserve the council's deliberations. Physician reports survive. Even some first-hand accounts remain, though filtered through the language of religious devotion and humoral medicine. We know names: Frau Trophäa, a man identified only as Marxe, several women whose accounts described the terror of watching their bodies move without their consent, and we know something else. They knew they were dying, and they could not stop. Paracelsus, the famous Renaissance physician, visited Strasbourg in 1526 to investigate what had happened. His diagnosis was characteristically confident and characteristically sexist. The dancing mania, he concluded, was caused by female hysteria and willfulness. Frau Trophea, he claimed, had been asked by her husband to do some household task she didn't want to do. Rather than argue, she started dancing, a rebellion disguised as affliction, manipulation dressed up as madness. The fact that men also danced, that people died, that the epidemic lasted months, none of this troubled Paracelsus's certainty. He saw a woman behaving strangely and reached for the oldest medical diagnosis in the book. Blame her. But someone else offered a different solution. St. Vitus, the boy martyr who survived being boiled in lead and tar only to befriend the lion sent to devour him, had a reputation as a healer of conditions involving involuntary movement. Trembling limbs, convulsions, uncontrollable gestures, all these fell under St. Vitus's patronage. Desperate, the city council ordered the afflicted loaded onto wagons and transported up the mountain to a shrine dedicated to the saint. The dancers continued moving during the journey, writhing in the wagon beds, some falling out and having to be lifted back in. At the shrine, priests said Mass over their convulsing bodies. They distributed small wooden crosses and pairs of red shoes, both blessed with holy oil on every surface, tops, bottoms, laces. And then, gradually, the dancing stopped. Whether it was the pilgrimage, the ritual, the psychological break that comes from being told your suffering has meaning, or simply the natural end of the epidemic's cycle, we can't know. But within days of the pilgrimage, most dancers regained control of their bodies. The compulsion faded. The streets of Strasbourg grew quiet again. The dead were buried. The red holy shoes were kept as relics. And the event entered the historical record under a new name, St. Vitus's Dance. Modern science has proposed many explanations. Ergot poisoning from contaminated grain, which can cause convulsions and hallucinations, but not the coordinated movement witnesses described. Epilepsy or other neurological conditions, but none of these are contagious. A secret cult engaged in forbidden rituals, but the terror and death seem real, not theatrical. The most compelling explanation is also the most unsettling: mass psychogenic illness, mass hysteria, a collective psychological break triggered by unbearable stress. Consider what Strasbourg had endured in the decades before 1518, 4 major famines between 1492 and 1511. In 1516, food prices tripled. In 1517, chroniclers called it the bad year, famine so severe that parents watched their children starve. In 1518, smallpox and syphilis were spreading. The orphanage was overwhelmed. The city was filled with beggars, displaced farmers, families torn apart by disease and hunger. People were living in a state of perpetual crisis, their bodies on the edge of survival, their minds seeking any explanation for suffering that seemed endless and meaningless. In that context, dancing becomes something else, a physical manifestation of psychological collapse, a way for the body to express what the mind cannot process. Medieval people believed in demonic possession, in divine punishment, in invisible forces that could seize control of the body. If you believe you can be possessed, if everyone around you believes it, if your entire culture has frameworks for understanding loss of bodily autonomy, then under sufficient stress, your body might enact that belief. Not consciously, not as deception, but as a genuine psychological and neurological response to unbearable conditions. The dancing plague was not fun. It was not transcendent. It was people breaking under pressure, their bodies moving because stillness meant facing a reality too terrible to endure. And the cure, the pilgrimage, the holy shoes, the ritual, worked not because St. Vitus intervened, but because ritual gives meaning to suffering. It provides a narrative, a beginning and middle and end, where before there was only chaos and death. The records from 1518 were carefully preserved. The city council's meeting notes, the physician reports, lists of the dead. Strasbourg didn't try to hide what happened. They documented it, perhaps hoping future generations would understand what they could not. The accounts were copied, circulated, debated by physicians and theologians across Europe. The red shoes remained in the shrine for centuries, slowly degrading until finally they disappeared, stolen, destroyed, or simply crumbled to dust. But the story endured. In the city archives, you can still read the ordinances banning dancing and drums. You can trace the names of some who danced. You can see the careful accounting of how much the musicians were paid before the city realized they were making everything worse. These are not legends or myths. These are bureaucratic records of an event no one could explain, preserved by people who wanted desperately to understand what had happened to their city. Today, psychologists recognize dancing manias as culturally specific expressions of mass psychogenic illness, rare but documented across history and across cultures. The symptoms manifest according to cultural expectations. In medieval Strasbourg, where people believed in possession and divine judgment, stress became uncontrollable dancing. In other contexts, other symptoms emerge, but the underlying mechanism is the same: unbearable pressure, collective belief, and bodies expressing what minds cannot articulate. There's no monument to Frau Trophäa in Strasbourg, no marker where she first stepped into the street and began to dance. The timber house where she lived is long gone, rebuilt and rebuilt again over 5 centuries. The cobblestones she bled on have been paved over. The shrine to St. Vitus still exists, but it's a quiet place now, visited more by tourists than pilgrims. History has moved on. But the city has never entirely forgotten the summer when dancing meant death, when music became a weapon, when the line between body and mind blurred so completely that people moved against their will until their hearts gave out. Picture Frau Trophäa one last time, not in the street, but afterward, assuming she survived. Picture her in the weeks after the pilgrimage, sitting in her house, tentatively flexing her feet, the red, holy shoes beside the door. Does she trust her body anymore? Does she dare to move freely, or does every gesture carry the fear that it might never stop? And when she hears music in the distance, a wedding, a festival, a merchant whistling while he works, does some part of her begin to sway just for a moment before she catches herself and goes still? The dancing plague ended. The city recovered. Life continued. But for those who danced, for those who watched, for those who loaded the writhing bodies into wagons and heard their screams echo off the mountain, for them, some fundamental trust was broken. The trust that your body belongs to you, that movement is voluntary, that the boundary between self and not self is secure. They learned in the most visceral way possible that under the right conditions, that boundary can dissolve, that you can become a stranger to yourself, that your body can betray you more completely than any enemy ever could. And 500 years later, we read the records and we wonder, what pressure are we living under that we can't quite name? What stresses are we absorbing that our bodies will eventually have to express? What will our dancing plague look like when it comes? Because mass psychogenic illness hasn't disappeared. It's changed forms, adapted to new cultural contexts, but the mechanism remains. When the pressure becomes unbearable and the mind cannot process it, the body finds a way. It always does. Somewhere in Strasbourg, beneath the modern streets, the old cobblestones remain. And if you could strip away the centuries of paving and construction, you might still find traces of blood in the cracks between the stones. Markers of the summer when 400 people danced and danced and danced and could not stop dancing even as their bodies fell apart. They moved until they couldn't, and then, finally, they were still.